So it is just about, and hopefully the day that this video is released, it will be the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing. And a few months back, my wife got from her mom a bunch of Life magazines. And as we were going through them, I realized that there were a bunch of them that had to do with the Apollo, Mercury, and Gemini space programs. And I thought it would be neat just on the anniversary to go through a few of them. I have about 33 that cover the various different space programs, Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo. I won't go through all of them, just go through a few just to sort of highlight it, because I think it's neat because first off, Life magazine had a special exclusive contract with the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo astronauts and NASA that granted them exclusive access to certain things. They were able to go in like inside the astronauts' homes and interview their families. And so, for the time, this was probably one of the best sources of information to be able to get, information on the astronauts and their lives and their training and, sort of the inside scoop. And though a lot of the information in here is probably available online, some of the pictures may not be, but certainly some of the stories are, and through various documentaries. But at the time, this is probably one of the best sources of information about the space program itself and the astronauts that were a part of it. So first off, the size of these magazines is just is crazy, which is actually nice because they dedicate a lot of the pages in here to just good-sized full-page pictures and stuff. So this first issue we'll look at is from March 3rd, 1961, and it's highlighting Glenn, Grissom, and Shepard, who were the astronauts that were picked to go on the Redstone launches. And you can just see sort of the type of access that Life magazine had, of course, with their families and things like that. The telling the astronauts stories, showing their family life. So it's just it's a really interesting look. And I actually haven't read through a lot of these articles. But really just trying to, really just showing that, these are just normal guys. They're just doing extraordinary things. And then here's looks sort of a guesstimated timetable of what the U.S. and Russian space programs might be doing. Of course, the lander never ended up looking like that, more like that. So that's it for that one. So the next one we'll look at is the June 18th, 1965 issue, and this is covering Dwight's Spacewalk, the first American spacewalk, and they dedicated 16 pages to it. And I mean, again, not having internet or anything, being able to pick up this magazine and have these images and be able to read the story and things like that must have just been pretty amazing. I mean, I don't know, I wasn't alive then, but I could just imagine that if you wanted to know information, that this is probably was one of the best sources out there, these Life magazines that were covering the various stories, and then also the imagery and stuff that was available that wasn't available probably anywhere else. Maybe catch a glimpse of it on TV, maybe something in a newspaper, but these images here are probably pretty exclusive to something like Life magazine. Certainly other magazines had access to these images, they're public images, but I don't know what the coverage was like in various other magazines. Again, because of Life magazine's contract with NASA and the exclusive access that they had to the astronauts and things, they may have had more invested in dedicating magazine pages to the stories and to the images and things. Dwight's glove floating out into space. I mean, just really neat to see what it was like back then in terms of the coverage and things like that. A return back. That was it. Looking through some of these ads in these magazines is it's pretty cool too. And this is the type of thing that Life magazine had access to. Is of course the access to the astronauts' families, capturing those images and things like that. So this next one is September 24th, 1965, and this is some images from Gemini 5. What's also interesting is that when you compare just the public nature of the U.S. space program to the Russian space program, even setting aside the special access that Life may have had, NASA was very public with the program and gave the press very broad access to the program. China. But you just imagine, I mean, never having, most people have never seen, today we take these sorts of things, these sorts of images for granted, I think. But this is some of the first time that these images were ever seen this broadly in the public. So the next issue is July 1st, 1966, and this is an article on Surveyor and showing the images that came back from Surveyor. Of course, Surveyor was a probe that was sent to the moon to help figure out the terrain and geology of the moon to help prep for the landing. Color wheel, probably I'm guessing for color comparison, calibration. We do similar things on probes that we send to Mars today. Probably a little more sophisticated now. There's a panoramic view. And see, like, this sort of image is like reminiscent of something that we might see today from like one of the Mars landers or rovers. But this is, this was groundbreaking, completely brand new for the time. And the next one is Gemini 10, and this is August 5th, 1966. So we've jumped a little bit ahead in time. This is a view from Gemini 10. And I thought about reading some of these, some of the articles and stuff like that, but I don't know how exciting that would be. I think it's more just, you just thumb through some of these. Just thumbing through them is kind of just interesting amongst itself. So they're already talking about trash in orbit. Of course, that's something that comes up today quite often, all this space junk. And this next one from February 10th, 1967, covers the Grissom, White, and Chaff tragedy, the capsule fire that resulted in their deaths. This is White's funeral. Three riderless horses representing the astronauts. And of course, hindsight being, 2020, you realize that it was something that was preventable. It had been discussed before, the danger of having a pure oxygen environment inside the capsule, but the race to the moon took precedence in a lot of cases. But of course, after this, things were put on hold and corrections were made. But just a devastating accident. And this next one, covering Apollo 7's launch and mission, October 25th, 1968. Apollo 7, I think it was a test flight, and I think it orbited for 11 days. And again, here's more talking about the astronauts' lives. I think that's it for that one. So this next one, March 14th, 1969, is talking about the LEM. And I thought that this model here was pretty interesting. Model at the right, supported by paper clips, was put together in 1962 by Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corp., which later was awarded the $1.4 billion contract to build 15 LMs. Which, you make a 10-cent model and you get a $1.4 billion contract. I think that's pretty funny. But this is, of course, before the days of CAD or anything like that, so what else are you going to do, I suppose? Various different versions of the LEM. It looks like pretty close to the final one. Still a little different, I think. Of course, looks like assembly of a LEM. And again, it's hand-drawn drawings. There was no CAD back then. But just the amount of, looks like an article on the Concorde, just the amount of coverage that was dedicated, which is just amazing in these magazines. It's just neat to thumb through them. So this is June 6th, 1969. So this is the Apollo 10 mission. This is the mission before we landed on the moon, and this is just a flyby of the moon. And the LEM separating so they can test the redocking and everything. Just imagine being, back in that time and opening the magazine and seeing that image. Far side of the moon. Apollo 10 photographed these lunar badlands whose craters are yet unnamed. Imagine being that close and not being able to land. And of course, famous photographs now, Earthrise. So to my understanding, and just to reiterate this, no other magazine got pictures of the families. No other news organization was able to get pictures of the families like this. And there's Apollo 11 on the launch pad. So this next one is the July 4th, 1969. So this is nearly to the launch of Apollo 11. And this one just, again, sort of reiterates the sort of access and stuff that Life magazine had to the astronauts' lives, telling their stories, getting photographs of them throughout their daily life. Perhaps we take for granted today, even though we haven't been back to the moon on a manned mission, just how, maybe casually that we think about space travel. We think, we see rockets launch all the time, we put satellites up all the time, but we forget that back then it was so new. And again, because the U.S. space program was so open, the families of the astronauts saw all the failures up until that point, and the public saw those failures. Rockets getting halfway up a launch pad and then just coming crashing back down and stuff like that. So, and all of this was just so new. Profile of the Apollo 11 mission. And this next one, July 25th, 1969, of course, covering the launch, looks like, of Apollo 11. Another look at the cover. To have been there and witnessed that launch, chance of a lifetime. Liftoff. July 16th, 1969, 9:32 a.m. And the next one, August 8th, 1969, just after the Apollo 11 landing. And the first thing is this ad. I came across this when I was thumbing through these magazines, and this is the Volkswagen ad, and I think it's genius. I mean, it doesn't, first off, it's playing off what has to be just a hailstorm of publicity, obviously, with the moon landing. It doesn't even show their car, but it is a Volkswagen ad, so I don't know, I liked that. So. And again, I would imagine, and I don't know, but I would imagine that people were probably waiting, a lot of people were probably waiting with bated breath for this magazine to come out, because, these images, where else are you going to get them besides magazines and, newspapers and things like that? But this large format. This was the internet of the day. Of course, the iconic picture. And like these images are obviously, you know, were printed elsewhere and stuff like that. These are NASA images. These aren't exclusive to Life, but, you know, Life magazine was a place that people went to see these images, and it was probably one of the handful of magazines that was printing, I mean, a picture this large. I mean, just imagine being someone back in that day and opening up the magazine and seeing that image. Maybe you saw it on TV before, maybe you saw it in a black and white newspaper, but color and this big print had to have been pretty cool. I mean, it still is. I mean, that's just, it's amazing. And I think that is it for that one. And there's another ad. There's an ad for Sony. That's actually one of the things that would be neat to scan, because I thought about scanning some of these, at least the specific stories for each one related to the space program at the time. But something else you'd probably want to consider scanning is, if you had something like this, is the ads, because you know, like the Sony ad, the Volkswagen ad I showed before, you know, that was a part of the story as well. So I hope you found this somewhat interesting. I was thumbing through these, and I thought it would be fun to share it with other people. I didn't go through all of them. I've got 33 of these things. It would take forever to go through them. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.